Before we mix our Param 6000, just a couple of key factors to consider. This is a helical style drill paddle. This is what we call a single style. If you're going to mix self-leveling cements, you want to use a double helical style drill. We don't have that, so we're going to use what we refer to as a Jiffy mixer. Basically, on this works fine. What I like about this is it conforms to the side of the bucket. So in other words, the bucket has a little bit of a bow to it, and that follows that bow as well. Before we start mixing, just a couple of observations on our drums. Okay, this is typically we're going to mix 2 bags of the Param 6000. The mix ratio is between 5.5 quarts up to 5 3/4 quarts per bag of material. It's not a bad idea to pre-wet your drum. Believe it or not, despite this being a heavy gauge plastic, it'll still absorb some water. So what we do is we precondition it, we dump out the residual, and then that won't absorb the actual mix water for the Param 6000. On the bottom of these buckets, you see it has little handles, okay? So if you're dumping, your helper can actually be on the other side. But the downside of that is, although it's concave here, on the inside of the bucket it's convex, meaning it's a protrusion into the bottom of the bucket, which impedes the mixing of the paddle. So what we've done through the years is our leftover epoxy, if we're doing an epoxy job, we just simply put epoxy in the bottom of the bucket, and now we've got a level surface. It weights the bucket a little bit, but you get a lot more thorough mixing. So that's just a good little tip, okay? So it's always going to be the water's in the bucket, and then you slowly add the powder into that while the drill is mixing. A really couple important factors to consider. Any cement-based product sets quicker under heat. The point being, if you're doing a large job and perhaps you have the mixing station outside, it's summertime in the direct sunlight, tint it or shade it, anything that you can do to keep the materials cool. Oftentimes, if it's warm conditions for whatever reason, we'll actually chill the water. We'll use ice water, and that extends the working time, okay? So it's just little things like that you have to consider. Once you've started this material mixing, the stopwatch starts, and you never want to have a lapse in that mixing. If I'm out on the floor and I can hear the drill paddle mixing, I get real anxious if it stops for whatever reason. I should hear a continual drill mixing throughout the duration of the pour. So having said that, it's not a bad idea to always have a backup drill out on the job site. I've actually seen the bushings in a drill burn up, and if you don't have a backup drill, that could spell disaster out on your floor. So we're going to get busy starting to mix. We want to mix a minimum of 3 minutes or at least 3 minutes, because if you try to cut corners and say mix 1 minute, that's going to really promote pinholing in your finished floor. So remember, cement is caustic to breathe, so it's really mandatory to go ahead and wear your dust mask while mixing. And so we'll get busy mixing, 2 bags per batch. Brian's already got some water weighed out there, 5.5 quarts, so we'll dump it in here. And then we'll get this mixing. I'll help him start the second batch, and then we'll take our little hand cart and put it up on that. You have to work smart, okay? Meaning don't strain your back. If you can avoid sitting here having to lift the material yourself, we have these little carts basically that's used in the furniture business for rolling appliances. So we'll just simply put this right on here, and one person can roll the cart right over. Pretty easy. So, all right, we're going to put our mask on and start mixing. One of the things you don't want to do while mixing is just go up and down with the drill, because what that does is it actually entraps air into the mix. Keep the drill paddle submerged. You want that drill paddle completely submerged while mixing. Okay, we have our 2 mixes in there, meaning the mix ratio is 5.5 quarts per bag. So Brian has put 5.5 times 2 equals 11 quarts of water. So we've mixed up the first bag. Now he's putting the second bag in, and then we'll mix that for a total of 3 minutes and start installing it. You can see the viscosity of the material. Also, it's not a bad idea to have a margin trowel and keep the sides of the buckets clean. But notice the vortex. If while mixing, you start to see a little bubble right here, see that bubble? If that bubble gets to a quarter size, that means you've overwatered the mix. So I'm always looking for this right here. Barely a bubble. Any bigger than that, it would be overwatered, so that's a good indicator. Okay, let's put it back on there. All right, we have our mix ready to go, so now it's time to bring it right over here. All right, here we are. We're going to put our 2 bags, our first 2 bags of the Param 6000. A couple of pointers. You'll notice these shoes. What I do when I get these spiked shoes is I take an angle grinder and immediately I flatten off these nibs or these tips. What you don't want is something like this, where it's really sharp all the way to a point. The reason for that is these points can actually puncture through your primer. Whether it's this EO2 primer or your styrene acrylic primer, you don't ever want to go with points like that. So be conscious of using a shoe where it's kind of doled out on the bottom. Now, when it comes to actually dispersing the material or spreading the material, there's a variety of different gauge rakes, as you see here. This is what we call a cam gauge rake, and basically it sets it to the depth. This is commonly used for self-leveling overlays. And again, whatever the thickness that you adjust this rail to, I like this because it doesn't, the rail rides along the surface and it doesn't scrape or puncture your primer. When you put it down, you want to keep this at a constant level. Don't gauge rake this way or don't gauge rake that way, because it's going to change the pitch and change the ultimate elevation. So we're going to do this. Now, with regard to the finishing of it, some people prefer using a smoothing paddle. This is a traditional smoothing paddle, which works really nice, and there's definitely a fine art to how you smooth, which I'll talk about here in just a minute. One of my personal favorites is using a smoothing paddle like this that has the rounded edge here. And the reason for that is you're less likely to get a line in your overlay from having a sharp point like this. It allows you to kind of feather edge each pass that you make. So we're going to continue mixing over here, and I'm going to get set up to start putting the material down. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, it's very important to work smart. What I mean is don't use your back, try to lift this. This is 120 pounds plus of material. So logically, it's going to tell you I'm not going to try to lift it. So I'm simply going to just put it on its side, like you see here. Once I've emptied the mix, or almost emptied the mix, where there's almost nothing left in it, then it's fine to come in and pour it. Okay? So you got to work smart here. So now what we're going to do is put this bucket here. Brian's going to help me lift this next one, slide it over here. All right, same thing. I'm going to dump this one right here. And then we're going to get busy on the last batch. Let me show you on this gauge rake what I'm talking about. You can see it's a nice flowable material. So first thing I need to do is get this mix over into the corner. So it's perfectly acceptable to just turn this up on edge and get it right up over there in the edge like that. Okay? Now I'm going to come this way, trying to keep a wet edge. Notice I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. I'm trying to keep it at the same elevation. Once I have it to where I think I want it, then I come back in and I give it a final raking like this. We have our Param 6000 gauge rake down. Now it's time for this next step, which is using the smoothing paddle. There's definitely a little bit of finesse involved when it comes to using this tool. Make sure certainly it's nice and clean. But what you want to do is, what I like to do is take the area, the room that I'm working in, and I want to try to always attack it at the narrowest point. So let's say we have a room 30 feet by 200 feet long. Logic would tell you you're not going to try to smooth the 200 foot long. You're not going to be able to get over that. You're going to have a cold joint. So I am going to use the narrower part. So the first thing that I do is, when I come across and smooth, number one is I angle it the direction that I'm going. So I come across this way, angling it. I'll make a pass this way. I'll come back and angle this way. By angling it like I'm showing you here, what it's forcing me to do is apply more pressure on the leading edge here and less pressure out here, in essence feather edging the material. And I'm reducing smoother lines by doing that. So I'm going to demonstrate right here. Notice the angle. I'm going to turn here, stop. I'm going to make a pass back this way. Turning. Once again, turning. Notice how I'm feather edging out on that outer edge over there. Once again, riding up over my rail. Starting here. And then one last pass here. That's pretty much how easy the material is installed. Now I will tell you, there's a couple of other tools that oftentimes we use. One is with a roller system. So sometimes guys will tell me that they're not comfortable using this, and depending on your technique and skill level, especially if the material is setting quickly, you might see some smoother lines. Okay, I don't think we're going to see too many on this one, but you can use this custom roller, which is really designed for self-leveling cements. We're going to demonstrate this on the application of the Param 5500. But anyways, that was a very successful installation. Probably, since we're going to polish this, we want to go ahead and let it cure out overnight. You probably come back 10 to 12 hours from the time that it's been installed, which means we'll come back first thing in the morning and we'll put a grinding and polishing machine on this.